space. But what we're finding nowadays, and I was just speaking with someone before we started here, is with regards to what's happening with the coronavirus and potential pandemic of germs that we're going to find, and that more and more people are going to stop traveling. Therefore, our industry will finally really take off by necessity. And as you probably have all seen historically, we've always gotten a jump and a tick up in the industry when something negative has happened, whether it's a weather phenomena, a terrorist phenomena, but that's going to continue. I'm afraid it may be more so now with these kinds of viruses. So we're 23 years later and we're still not totally unified. And I really think that this is an evolutionary process, not a revolutionary process. Somebody recently asked me to give a keynote speech, and I was able to pull slides I had from the 80s and change a few words, and they still fit today, believe it or not. Now, they looked a little better than maybe back then because I might have been using overhead transparencies in those days. But a lot of the same things we were dealing with 20 and 30 years ago, we're still dealing with today. And that's why I say I think this is a more of an evolutionary process than a revolutionary process. So let's look a little bit about what's happening with the various competitors in this space. And this was provided by Ovum, talking about the VCAS members, the traditional VC and UC vendors. A lot of these names you'll see and say, I remember them, but they're now gone, or they've morphed into something that they weren't at the time. When I started in this industry, the three key video players were GPT, NEC, and CLI. Now, some of you may say, who the heck are you talking about? I don't remember or think of any of those as video vendors. They're gone in that space. So things evolve very quickly. If I'd said to you 10 years ago that Zoom was going to be a big player in the video space, you would think that was a crazy name, and what was I talking about? So what's happening in this space is we are getting two things happening. More of the big players have finally put their toe in the water. By that I mean the Microsoft, Cisco, Google, Amazon, bigger companies. The comment I get from a lot of them is that I'm a niche in comparison to my whole organization in some instances, so I don't necessarily get all the funding I'd like around my niche. You are going to hear tonight at our dinner panel from Jason Gecke, who is the new VP and General Manager of Intel Unite. Some of you may have no idea what Intel Unite is. Intel is a very big corporation. Unite is a small knit within the organization, but a very powerful one. So you're going to see that what's happening is now we have a variety of vendors who are saying, could we all play together? Could we address one another and do relationships with one another so that we're able to go out to the marketplace with a packaged offering? For those of you who are end users, it just confuses you that much more. And people say to me from an end user perspective, when do I get involved? When do I make changes? And my answer is when you have the business need to do so. They then say to me, how long is my change good for? And I tell them it could be as little as 18 months. Gone are the days when we do these things and write them off over 3 to 5 year period. Not happening anymore. So what we found now is the traditional vendors will face a crisis of prioritization in their investments. And the vendors that don't significantly invest in cloud these days are going to fail. We've got to get away from the traditional way of providing technologies. Software subscriptions offer flexible pricing. And it's going to be interesting to have our users come up here and tell us how are they handling these various vendors coming after them to be able to offer product and service. What are they picking now? What are they looking for to the future? And I say to all the users that I'm involved with, put your stake in the ground, support your stake in the ground. I just finished a major study with end users, with IT administrators, and with partners of vendors. And the end users have said to me, my biggest complaint is the IT administrators or our company make changes and don't tell us about the changes. I'm working the way I've learned to work, the way they've taught me to work with the tools they've given me. They come out with a new tool or offering. The IT department knows about it, but we don't know about it. I'm talking actual users of the technology. The IT administrators basically say to me, I want to know what the vendors are doing ahead of time. I want as much upfront information as I can get, specifically from those vendors whose technology I'm using. And I want to make sure that I have a path to follow as I want to grow and deploy my technology across my organization. So vendors are going to need to replace end-of-life underperforming legacy platforms, which they're doing. It was interesting to attend Poly yesterday and see the things they're doing and the relationships they're trying to do with other companies, meaning vendor partners. But once again, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And as you all know, I get the biggest complaint from the users is, would Microsoft please play with everybody else? That's probably the #1 complaint I get from the user organizations. And everybody says we're working with them. You don't see them. You don't see them at these events. They're playing in their own sandbox. They're going to do it their own way. So what is driving the change in the marketplace? A changing workplace and a changing customer demands, new ways of working, new digital channels. The thing I think we all need to very much sit up and take notice right now is, if indeed this coronavirus takes hold and spreads like we think it might, we're going to all have to rethink how we're working completely. How are we getting to work? How are we attending events? In case you had not heard, ISE, the event in Europe, was down 30,000 attendees this year. That's a significant number. That's going to continue. As I spoke with someone, I'm planning to go to Enterprise Connect. I'm planning to go to InfoComm, but that may change. And if I find there's going to be issues of pandemics and viruses, I may not get in the plane or get on a train and go to a big event with a lot of people. And I think you too are probably thinking that as well. So we as an industry are going to have to decide, how do we get our message out to people on a more regular basis? And how do we do it effectively if these things take place? Now, are we all going to benefit as an industry? You bet we are, because more of the technology and services are going to be sold. Freemium models, which we're seeing more of, means no or low risk and try it before you buy it. And as you well know, the users like to do that. Nothing wrong with that. Ease of use drives user adoption and, of course, circumvents the IT. And that's been a problem that the IT administrators tell me when we research them, is it either is free or costs very little for our users to try new things. And so when we go through an organization and find out how many new things they have, on average, they're using 5 to 7 different collaboration technologies within an organization, and usually 2 to 4 of those the IT department has no idea they're using. Why? Because it's inexpensive for the users to get, or free for the users to get, and they may have a team or group of people they're working with that uses it, or they may have a partner, supplier, or customer who uses a technology that's not necessarily sanctioned internally, but that they're using because of a special project they're on. And then lastly, consolidated and integrated suites are favored best-of-breed mixes. And so once again, it's who's got the best out there, who's got the easiest out there, and who's willing to play in multiple sandboxes. So let's talk a little bit about the unified communications and collaboration market today. We always have a threat of new entrants because it's low barrier to get into it. There are new companies coming out with things. Every time I read some sort of a publication, there's a name I've got to go research. Invariably, what I typically find is someone we all know has gone to that and started that company or is working at that company. I don't know about you, but when I go to trade shows, you people play musical chairs and booths. You're running from vendor to vendor, and you may say to me, you may remember me at X company, I'm now with Y company. So we see a lot of that. We've got bargaining power of the suppliers. Channels are reluctant to adapt service models and create their own IP, low-cost handset alternatives and USB devices, because the cost of the technology has dropped so drastically over the years, and or it's free, you can try a lot of things that you might not have tried before. And we've gotten to the point where we seem to be beyond the alpha beta that they don't work. The other caution I make to all the users is when someone does come to you with a new technology they want you to try, and before you decide to buy from them, make sure they're funded. I can't tell you the number of organizations I've worked with who have some really great products with absolutely minimal funding behind them. And when it comes time to roll out the product, they are hoping that a corporation or major institution is going to be the one that gives them the money to finish that product. And they're hoping that somebody will think the product looks so neat, they're going to give them money to continue with it. Buyer beware. I can cite company names this has happened to. When I worked many years ago for AT&T, there was a comment made to me as I was getting into the marketplace with new offerings by our management team that said, come to me when we can make $100 million offer any product you're recommending. They said, if we can't make $100 million out the door, we're not interested in getting involved. Now, there were a lot of smaller companies that would raise their hand and say, 10 million would be fine with me, I don't need 100 million. So you have to keep in mind that lots of times these offerings out there don't get funded because they're not giving a fast enough return on investment to people. The other issue with regards to this is the threat of substitutes. We're getting a lot of that now. My favorite story is when I did some work for a major pharmaceutical company. It took us almost a year to decide what technology they were going to deploy across the world. So you could imagine, and this was back in the early 90s, you can imagine what it took to be able to find out what we could do in Japan and Germany and the United States. We got this all done, and we had a gentleman who was from Texas who decided he could go to his local supply store, buy all the parts to put together his own codec and system out of his garage, and save the company $50,000. And he was dead serious that this is what he was going to do. We had to go to senior management to get him to be stopped because we didn't want people being the heroes of the day to save the company $50,000 when their $50,000 saving was going to wreck what we were trying to do globally. So you've got to be careful of threats of substitutes in many ways. Bargaining power of customers is also high. Those of you in the vendor space certainly know that these days, with the fact that there's low switching costs, extensive range of substitute offering solutions available, propensity to buy suites of offerings and best of breed, and they're very price sensitive. My answer to you vendors there is your caveat is service. And a lot of you, in my opinion, don't offer very great service. You are still box houses. You're still selling widgets. You're not selling to the customer. And I said this to two CEOs in this space many years ago. If you really want to be successful, and these were two video CEOs, you need to be incenting your salespeople as to how often your technology is used and how much it permeates an entire organization. Not that you sold 20 or 100 to a named company and then move on to the next company. So you've got to be very careful that if you offer service behind your technology and get people comfortable with it to the point where they view it as a necessity, not a nicety, you're going to be much more successful with your technology. I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years working with an integrator who will not be named, who has a lot of customers that don't get it. They're selling at a fairly low level to the box people. They're not selling at the business level as to how do you solve my business problems, and they don't get the idea of the service. There are others of you out there. I'm telling you, you can make money if you will sell service to your customers, or if you say my customer won't pay for the service, bundle it so that they don't know they're being charged separately for the service. Free consultation. So why is all of this happening? Well, part of this is customers are leapfrogging technology. And in many ways, I blame the breakup of the Bell system for this, which actually happened in 1984, so I'm going backwards here, but purposely. The reason they're leapfrogging with technology is a lot of the technology that got put in more quickly often happened overseas when we were in the midst of breaking up a nationwide network and we had pockets of areas that didn't have the kind of network technology we needed. For instance, back 20, 30 years ago, you would not have been happy with your cell phone as if you drove in a certain area and you lost service. Happens to us all the time. I have people who will say to me as they're driving, I'm going through X town, I'll call you back in 5 minutes. Same thing is true with the wearability of technology. We've become a very disposable society. I would very much love to have had one phone that I could have carried forever and not have to get another phone. You want to upgrade my software, upgrade it, but don't make me throw out a phone every 2 years. I am tired of that. But that's the relationship that we're in now. We're having a leapfrogging of technology all the time, and we've become a very disposable society. Legacy vendors face a crisis of prioritization as to what way the users are going to go. And I step back again and say, you've got to help them make the decision. What are we calling it? We've always been very bad as an industry at naming terminology and explaining what the terminology means. So I always say to the customer, when somebody comes in and says to you, this is the kind of firm we are, drill down a little bit. It may mean something totally different to you. Unified communications or collaboration may mean something totally different to you than it does to the vendor that you're dealing with. Consolidation is not enough to survive, and you're going to see that. You're seeing people going out of business even though they're being acquired. Video, for example, we don't see much of them anymore. Few vendors are yet willing to make strategic compromises by saying no to some customers. I'm starting to see this happen. I've started to see a few vendors who've said, I'm not going to respond to that RFP. I know the business isn't there for me. Yes, I want to make sure that they know we are a player in the space. But if I don't think I can make enough out of that particular sale, or I think the road they're going is the wrong road, I'm going to turn down that opportunity. And the long-term winners are cloud-based vendors with all-in-one suites. That's where we're headed. So let's look from a market summary perspective of where we're going. We started with proprietary platforms. We then went with devices, and now we're in a space where we have a lot of different new names to us that are now starting to play together. And I can tell you, when David and I were first involved with this presentation, I had to Google some of these companies to see who the players were and who was running them. And it was amazing to me how many of the company names, once I looked at them, were people you would all know that were with other companies at another point in time. Second verse, same as the first, slight change, slight name change. So that's where we're moving to. And there will be more names added to that. Always, when does it happen? After Enterprise Connect and after InfoComm, when people make announcements. So you can figure June and sometimes March of every year we have some of these announcements. So what's happening is we've got the battle for Mindshare right now. And what's happening in the minds of the customers, and this is why the users get frustrated, so do the IT administrators, is we have these silos of companies saying, I want you to go to my events, I want you to support my platform, and don't bother with the other. So you look at, we've got Cisco Live, we've got Microsoft Ignite, we've got Zoomtopia, and I'm sure a lot of you attend these various events. In fact, I've been with some of you in an event where you've said to me, next week I'm going to this one, and the following week I'm going to that one. So let's talk a little bit about these players. Is there anybody here from Cisco today? Okay, and I'll bet there's nobody here from Microsoft either. They want to play in their own campground. Cisco, we do have a representative on our board, but they are not supporting this event. Cisco WebEx is hassle-free conferencing and collaboration that just works. Now, I will tell you, there are some end users that will say to me, that's not true all the time. And if you don't know, one of the reasons Zoom got started is because Eric Wan, who was with Cisco, wanted money to improve WebEx and was not given that money. Ergo, he went off and started his own sandbox and is doing quite well in it. So what we've put up here are some talking points about Cisco and some cautions about Cisco. WebEx has had many band-aids and changes over several years. They even changed the way they spelled the name, which drove me crazy. It used to be W-E-B capital E-X. And I started seeing them both in a presentation, and I picked up the phone and I called and I said, would you please straighten me out? I was an English major in college and it really bothered me to see that the logo and brand they had was now changed. And they said, oh no, we have changed it. You may see it both ways, but we've decided now it's just one word. And I'm like, boy, your marketing people need help. Cisco has pivoted several times on their strategy and naming to the point that they're confusing everybody. You know, as they acquire various organizations, different things come out. Same flavor, different name, and you get to the point where you're not sure who owns what anymore. They have multiple competing projects and products in the same space, and most of the highly regarded members of their team have left. Now, I'm not disparaging Cisco any more than I will disparage any of the others, except to say to you, what was of old does not mean it's going to be of today. And you've got to be aware of what's happening with the organizations you're dealing with, what their positives are and what their negatives are. All the more reason we put this ammunition together for you and we give you these slides afterwards. Let's move on. Microsoft Teams. I will be the first to admit I still haven't gotten it to work on my PC. And I've confounded several of the vendors who say to me, what do you mean you haven't gotten it to work? And it's a desktop. Oh, you're not using a laptop? I said, no, I'm using a desktop. So it's not the end-all be-all, and they don't like to play with a lot of other people. Teams room systems haven't allowed for easy access to other services. Third-party interrupt can often be a problem. I can't tell you the number of times, and David and I both do this all day long. We're on different people's technologies and offerings. They'll say to me, you have to reboot your computer. I hate having to reboot my computer just to go from one software to the next software. But that's the reality. They don't really have a great room solution, especially for users that have multiple services. Some organizations find managing in-room PCs easier. Some find it harder, depending on how your setup is. They work really well in a Microsoft environment. But if you're in a mixed environment, it's not necessarily easy. How about Zoom? Hot topic these days, hot commodity these days. The first thing it says to me, as somebody who's been doing this a very long time, is when are they going to be acquired? You know, everybody has a price. Eric may say to you, I don't have a price, I've made enough money on it, I'm keeping it going. But I contend that everybody has a price. Connecting to Zoom from legacy video systems requires an extra charge. Most Zooms have been glorified do-it-yourself kits. I will say, and I'm a great test of all these technologies, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Drives my husband insane. Fortunately, he's an engineer. And then I have David as backup. Zoom development is so rapid that they may have made mistakes along the way. Well, that's to be expected, as long as they correct them. I.e., there was a big security issue not too long ago with Zoom. I applaud Zoom for what they've done to the marketplace. They have certainly shot energy into the organization and the awareness. It's really wonderful, and I really thank Apple more than I thank anyone else, that people have some idea of what we're talking about, and we're no longer saying, you know, like the Jetsons. And what I'm finding nowadays, if you say, you know, like the Jetsons to anybody under 35, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So you get to the point now where you have some of these new companies that have done well. It's good for all of us as an industry. But you need to be cognizant of the pros and cons. And then, now I'll pick on Google, since we're here. And I mentioned the first one already. Collaboration in Google space is a flea in comparison to their main sources of revenues. Things get added and killed by them all the time. Hangouts Meet is incompatible with all the other video services out there, and they have a rationale for why that, and I'll let Sandy address that later if he wishes. They only allow one external firm to provide interoperability. Organizations with a lot of external party contacts might find it difficult to constantly have to translate the common Microsoft files to the G Suite files. However, I'm sure they have a strategy. I don't know how much Sandy will tell us later, but there are positives to what Google's doing in this space. And I will say to all of you, the positives for all of us is that we're finally getting big players to play in our space. We didn't have that many years ago. They were all little-known firms. We all said to ourselves, this industry will finally take off if the big players will play. And I have to say, when we were talking about that, we didn't know who Google was. They didn't exist when we had those conversations years ago. But we're thrilled that they do, and we're thrilled that they have an interest. Now let's look at a few more of the spaces in here, because it isn't just the ones I've mentioned, we've got others. We've got Amazon Chime, we've got GoToMeeting, we've got Facebook Workplace, we've got Slack. I had a number of IT administrators come to me when Slack first came out, that their users were coming to them saying, we have to get Slack. They didn't know what Slack was. And because they found that a lot of their teams primarily were using Slack, they needed to look to see if they were going to support it. And one company said to me, we had to support it. It was growing like wildfire within the organization. We had to play catch up and learn what it was. Now, any of these companies could eventually either say, we're no longer going to support that offering, or we're about to be acquired by someone else. The bottom line to all of this is we have a lot of players in the space and a lot more coming. So, the bottom line is, who's telling the truth? Organizations will optimize their story, of course. Platforms will want to put you in their walled environment if they can do it. And I have to tell you, it's very true. If you will put all your technology to one supplier and provider, it really is easier from a usage and administrative perspective to be able to do that. The risk you run is that that provider no longer supports that technology at some point in time, or they get acquired and go out of business. Video is a good example. Bloomberg, as an example, became a video house. I haven't talked to Jeff Fairbanks lately, but I'm guessing they're scrambling to go to something else. Users need to speak with other users, which you get to do at conferences like these, to learn the pros and cons, and we do learn from one another. Hiring consultants can be of help to you, not because we necessarily know more, but because we've often been doing it longer and can ferret through some of the things you may not want to. You have to remember, most of you as users are in whatever business you're in, insurance, banking, finance, pharmaceutical, etc. You're not in this industry. So if you need help from others, get it. And we predict that hardware lock-in is going to go away, so services can be valued based on service. So, this is giving you an overview of where the battle lines are today. I'm going to take a few questions before I introduce the panel. I put you all asleep. I know I haven't put you asleep. My voice doesn't put anybody asleep. Questions, comments? Logical, makes sense? Scares the living daylights out of you?
Microphones, people can step up.
Yes. And please identify who you're from and then your question.
Hi, is the microphone?
It's on.
This is Jay McCullough from JP Morgan. So we are in the long pathway of moving away from Cisco, trying to go to Zoom. One of the things you said up there was Zoom doesn't really have any hardware lock-in just yet. It's kind of a Wild West, if anything, out there with Zoom hardware. I know we've got some folks in the room that are interested in selling me Zoom hardware or Zoom compatible hardware. What are we seeing? I haven't been in any of the conferences. I wasn't at ISE, but what are we seeing as far as the quality of the manufacturers out there stepping up their game and in my respect, going to a quality of a Cisco product, but as a third party that is interoperable with other.
Well, I'm surprised Poly isn't jumping all over the room here at this point in time. I assume you were at our Poly event yesterday, so they would be the first one to step up and say, by all means, we're addressing that issue. Others will as well. The thing I would say to all of you is, unless it's a known name that you have respect for and known they're a credible organization, buyer beware. Not to say to you that they're not going to be good. There are a lot of people in this room who did not look at Zoom when they initially came out, even though they knew where Eric came from. Even though they had some faith in WebEx, it was an unknown success story. It became a success story. I'm willing to bet your company never would have looked at Zoom initially. So the one thing I tell all of my clients that say, who do I look at, what do I do, is I say to them, get from the vendor who the others are that are using the technology. Not beta, not alpha, using the technology and have deployed it. And if they say to you, I don't have any names I can give you yet, wait. because they want you, with the name that you have behind you, to be that one, to be the one they can then quote to all the others. There isn't a perfect answer. As I said in the beginning, this is an evolutionary process, not a revolutionary process. We're not going to flip a switch and then all of a sudden all of this is going to go away and everything's going to be easy to use. I feel for you, but we've done this many times before. I'm not sure that answered your question, but
It's fine. I mean, we've got, it's a long, long marathon.
it is a long marathon. Yes, and it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Other questions or comments? We've got a mic over there. We got one here. Really, you're all asleep. Either that or you know all this. Or I did a good job. Okay, then I want to introduce our panelists today. Two of them are going to come up on the stage. One of them is going to sit in the audience. That's a whole other story, but we're going to have them come up. And once I get through some of these overview questions with them, which I hope are up there, because if they're not, I've got to go get them, we'll let you ask questions.